Hey, this is Eric Leduc, and we're in Management 1020. This is Chapter 5, Supply Chain Performance Measurements. And that's what we're going to focus on in at least this video and the next. And then we're going to get into the financial analysis part of the chapter in the last two videos for this chapter. I'm trying to break up the videos to be smaller so that the CC, the closed captioning, can work. Okay, so when we're talking about having relationships, one of the things in supply chain relationships that help us maintain the relationship and actually improve it is to have measurements that we measure our partners by and they measure us by, and that they're not arbitrary, that we agree on those measurements so we can know how we're doing, if we're getting the value out of the relationship that we want, if that they're getting the value that they want out of the relationship. So those measurements are really important. Now we're going to take those measurements and look at internal measurements. One of the things that we want to do is improve our supply chain performance and show that we are improving our supply chain performance. We're first going to start defining some terms. The first term is a measure or measurement. What is a measure or measurement? When I think of this, I think of my son going to the doctor. One of the first things they do is take him, stand him up, and see how tall he is, and then weigh him. That's a measurement. There's no calculations. We're just seeing how tall he is or how much he weighs. Now, a metric is taking a measurement or several measurements and making some sort of calculation with them. So a good metric would be the average age, or the average height, or the average weight. That's a metric. We go one step further when we create an index. So maybe we have an average inventory amount. So we average $10 million worth of inventory every day. And now index will say whether that's growing or shrinking. It could also say whether that's growing or shrinking compared to sales volume. So that's a number that combines two or more metrics. So the average in sales for the first week of November versus the average of inventory for the first week of November, that relationship will give us an index. We know that a measure is the basic building blocks for a metric and therefore an index. So what makes a good measure? This slide captures a relatively comprehensive list of what makes a good measure. The first thing is it quantitative? The reason we want it to be quantitative is we want it to be objective. If somebody says something is beautiful, well, that might be beautiful to you, but not to me. If you say that thing is 6 foot tall, well, I can't really argue that unless I pull out a measuring tape and say, oh no, you measured it wrong. So it's very objective. Is it easy to understand? Meaning, at a glance, can I recognize what we're trying to capture? Or is it kind of obtuse? Is it hard to figure out? Does it encourage the appropriate behavior? I was working at this one plant, and this is not uncommon for all plants, but they captured a measurement of total dollar of inventory at the end of the day of the last day of the month. But there's this game that they would play where they'd call their customers and ask if they could ship early, and they'd call their vendors and ask them if they could hold off on a delivery at the end of each quarter so that they could drop their inventory levels and it would look good. But that really screws up the supply chain. Now we have to expedite some orders from our vendors, and that costs more money, and it's game playing. A better capture would be to capture the inventory dollars on each day of the month and then make a metric. So we're capturing a measurement. So at the end of the day of each day of the month, how much inventory do we have on hand in dollars? And then for a monthly, we'll say, This is our average inventory, taking all those dailies and making an average. This is our average inventory for that month. Is it visible? If I'm collecting a measurement and just putting it in a spreadsheet and then reporting it quarterly, it's probably not having that much effect on behavior. So I'm not quite sure why that would be important unless it's regulatory, unless we're just doing this because by law we have to keep this or capture this measurement. Is it defined and mutually understood? This kind of goes back to, is it easily understood? But when we say defined, we're also saying agreed upon. When I say this is our inventory level, do we understand that the average inventory is the average of the end of each day? So part of the definition is we're collecting these measurements at the end of each day instead of at the middle of the day. Just part of the definition. So we really understand and we all agree that that's the fair and appropriate way to capture this measurement or metric. And we can actually, if we're doing things right, keep a running sign over our warehouse of how many dollars are in that warehouse at any given time. That's actually an easy thing to do when we're scanning things into the warehouse. They have a dollar amount, and we're scanning things out of the warehouse, and they have a dollar amount. Next, does it encompass both outputs and inputs? Right? So the idea is I put effort into something, and does it capture all that effort, or is some of that effort that is worthwhile missing from this measurement? Is it measuring what is important? I mean, maybe we don't need to know what the average inventory is. By regulation, we do, because that's capital investment. Maybe whip time from when a truck is offloaded to when it's entered into the system, maybe that doesn't matter as much. So why capture that? Is it multidimensional? This is maybe a characteristic that we really don't care about, but the measurement is properly balanced between utilization, productivity, and performance, and shows the trade-offs. Sometimes measurements to get that encompassing is hard to come by. Does it use economies of effort? If a measurement really takes a lot of time and money to get at, it might not be worth capturing. If we have to actually hire somebody full-time to capture this one measurement, maybe it's just not worth it. And then does it facilitate trust? Does everyone who's being, like if their bonuses are coming off of this measurement, do they agree that it's a valid way of determining their bonuses? I mean, that's a very legitimate question. And actually a lot of times in supply chain, the measurements we keep track of relate to raises, to bonuses, and to how well is our stock going to do. So a lot of our measurements have to do with all these types of things. So they're really important, and we really have to trust that they are accurate and correct. All right, this slide is just a commonly used metrics that we would find in a distribution center. The first one is on-time shipment to customer, meaning that I get a customer order and I have a certain amount of time, depending on the distribution center, to actually get that shipped. It's more interested in the distribution center's ability to get it out the door rather than whatever we're using to get it from the door to the customer. So it's really specific to order coming in, order leaving the distribution center. Order picking accuracy, I get an order, it has 3 items on it, a certain quantity on each item. How accurate am I to package that up? Warehouse utilization. This can look at different aspects of the warehouse. Maybe we have some warehouse storage that's air conditioned. Are we utilizing it? Can we reduce that? How can we make our warehouse more efficient? Employee turnover is a big metric. We have a lot of usually high employee turnover for distribution centers. Learning how to keep good employees for an extended period of time is important for distribution centers. Dock-to-dock cycle time means for a distribution center, some distribution centers actually do other services like kitting and order consolidation. That would be in this, but the main focus of dock-to-dock cycle time is we receive material in the distribution center, it gets processed, inventoried, put away. How long is it in the distribution center before it leaves and goes to the outbound dock? So inbound dock to the outbound dock. So we can look at the cycle time for inventory of a certain type, for total inventory, that type of thing. Inventory accuracy, this is a measurement that we look at in most distribution centers, most warehouses, even plants. We have certain areas in a plant. How accurate is the inventory? The system says that we have this much inventory in there. We'll do cycle counts on a regular basis, and that'll give us some input and correct the system, update the system with the accurate inventory. But we're trying to make sure that whatever the system says is what we have on hand. Because usually whatever system we're using also triggers us to buy more inventory, or it might trigger us in marketing to actually hold a sale to reduce inventory of that kind. Anyway, if there's anything that you really don't understand I haven't explained, you can always Google these things. In a previous slide, it said, or it pointed out that one of the good characteristics of a measurement is that it measures what is important. And this slide actually shows that what is important has changed for us over time as supply chain professionals. It used to be that we were really just concerned about production costs, and that's the 1960s. What you really need to remember and understand is that we've moved from production cost, manufacturing and inventory costs, then we started including transportation costs, and then distribution and logistics costs. And really, we're looking now at a more comprehensive picture. How much money does it take to run our supply chain? And really, what is our customer service levels? And we're taking into account the cost of lost sales, customers that will not get their product in time and then go to other customers. So that customer service level and the overall supply chain. This goes, think about how if we improve something in a silo, like we're trying to reduce transportation costs, well, we can do that by always using full truckloads, because it's cheaper to load up a whole truck and send it to a customer versus sending them package by package, right? But then our inventory costs go up. We might lose customers that way because our customer service is going down, right? So our transportation costs definitely went down, but we have so many other losses that the siloed effect, we found that it just doesn't work. So now, in our time frame, we're looking at total cost of the supply chain and how do we reduce that. It's a lot more complicated, but luckily we have a lot more IT tools to help us get those performance measurements and metrics out. So we've talked about the key characteristics of a good measurement. We've talked about some of the metrics and measures that we've used, like in the distribution center. And we've also talked about how what we have looked at and what we've really focused on has changed over time and has matured and has grown and made a better supply chain. Now, things still change, and we find the need to develop more measurements and more metrics. And right now, on this slide and this part of the lecture, we're going to talk about how we develop supply chain performance metrics. First thing that we want to point out is that this shouldn't be done in a silo or alone. As a supply chain manager, you want to involve your team members in the development of any measurement or metric that you're going to use later to judge their performance on or judge the overall performance of your plant supply chain. So we want to get their buy-in, and honestly, they have a lot of experience and they know, hey, if you're just going to measure that, these are the consequences. In other words, this measurement or metric really isn't going to get the performance enhancement or the energy or the work that you want to see, right? You're not going to take the team in the right direction. So maybe we don't want to measure that. Maybe we want to measure this, or maybe we want to make this metric. So again, having a team buy-in, having team effort, and really listening to your team members, especially those who've been there for a long time, is important. Sometimes we want to even involve our customer and our suppliers in this effort, especially if they're going to be affected by the measurement or how we're trying to move our performance based on our measurement. A tiered structure, the idea is that we get our strategic goals from top management, and they filter through mid-manager to frontline managers. And we want to make sure that our metrics wrap up, or our measurements wrap up into the metrics that they're reporting, that wrap up into the metrics that their managers are reporting, so that we're not wasting a lot of time and that we're all on the same page. After we've defined a good metric or measurement, we also want to define who's the owner, who's responsible for making improvements on that measure or metric, and also determining how they get rewarded for improving that measure or metric. There's also going to be potential problems that come. We might think that this measure or metric is not a siloed, or won't have a siloed effect. It won't be improving just a small area and hurting other areas, but it might. And what happens if it does and we have some conflict, and how do we mitigate that conflict? And then once we have all this established, we would go back up to our top manager and make sure, hey, this is what we want to measure, this is how we're going to measure it. Are you going to support us? Especially if it's going to take some time and money to get this metric or measurement out.